In an age dominated by hyperconnectivity, therapeutic language, and the illusion of individual empowerment, a paradox quietly persists. Beneath the surface, the average person is still psychologically delicate. Scratch the surface of modern confidence, and you'll often find a mind that is volatile, compulsively reactive, and easily swayed by external influences, social trends, emotional manipulation, ideological tides. The human psyche, for all its complexity, remains a fragile construct, patched together with borrowed beliefs and unexamined fears. Yet, scattered rarely among the masses, there are outliers, people who seem to move through life with a quiet, grounded immunity. These individuals do not flinch under pressure. They cannot be baited by offense or dragged into emotional chaos. They resist the manipulation of others not through aggression or aloofness, but through something deeper, a form of self-possession that is unnervingly calm. This observation begs a deeper question. What makes a person psychologically untouchable? Is this resilience a matter of genetics or circumstance? Or is it the result of an internal transformation, a deliberate confrontation with the inner architecture of the self? Carl Jung, one of the most profound explorers of the human soul, suggested that real strength doesn't come from repressing what is dark and unruly within us, but from turning toward it. His concept of shadow integration offers not just a psychological theory, but a radical blueprint for invulnerability, a state of being in which nothing within you remains unknown, and therefore nothing outside you can be used against you. This is not about becoming emotionless. It is about becoming whole. To be psychologically untouchable is not to become detached from reality, nor is it to build a stoic wall around oneself. It is to undergo an inner alchemical process, a dismantling of the false self constructed through social conditioning, childhood wounds, and inherited fears. Most people unconsciously arrange their personalities to avoid discomfort, rejection, or shame. They wear masks, project shadows, and outsource their emotional responsibility to others. But the untouchable ones? They have stripped those masks away. They have dared to descend into the basement of their psyche, confront the chaos, and come back with clarity. This is where Jung's shadow becomes not just a concept, but a mirror, showing us everything we were trained to ignore. Anger, envy, insecurity, the hunger for control, these are not flaws to be exiled. They are signals. And when acknowledged consciously, they become sources of strength. The integrated individual cannot be blackmailed by their own emotions. They no longer fear their darker impulses, nor do they act them out unconsciously. They have reclaimed the parts of themselves that most of us spend our lives running from. And in doing so, they become what so few ever do, psychologically sovereign. Section 1. Understanding the shadow, the root of vulnerability. You were not born fragmented. The child version of you did not yet carry the weight of should, and must, and never. But over time a split occurred. You began to notice which parts of yourself were welcomed and which were punished, by parents, teachers, friends. Slowly, you trimmed pieces of your personality just to survive love. That's how the shadow is born. Not as some evil twin lurking in the dark, but as a graveyard of exiled selves, the angry child, the lustful teenager, the jealous sibling, the one who wanted too much. Every time you silenced a part of yourself to keep the peace, it didn't disappear, it descended. For many, this shadow remains unspoken, unnamed. But it doesn't stay idle. It bleeds through in outbursts you can't explain, in judgment you hurl at others, in strange dreams that feel too real. Jung understood this. He didn't see the shadow as a flaw, but as a compass. It reveals where your ego is lying to you. When you over-identify with being good, kind, rational, or spiritual, your shadow waits in the wings, manifesting in cruelty, manipulation, or hidden rage. You say, "That's not me," and yet it is. You repress the very thing that holds the key to your freedom. They live unaware of this inner fracture. They think their actions are purely logical, their opinions objective, their reactions justified. But in truth, they are ruled by everything they refuse to confront. Someone criticizes them and they explode, not because of the words but because the shadow took over. Someone gets the attention they secretly crave, and they gossip or sabotage. Projection is their way of seeing the world, disguising their rejected parts as flaws in others. What they can't tolerate in themselves, they cannot tolerate in you. And they'll fight you for mirroring it back. Worse still, Others can manipulate what you refuse to see. They press the exact wounds you've buried. They trigger your shadow material like an instrument, watching you unravel without ever laying a hand. Emotional manipulators are not always clever, they simply understand your blind spots better than you do. The parts of yourself you don't own can be used against you. If you are ashamed of your anger, someone will provoke it and call you unstable. If you repress your need for love, someone will breadcrumb you and leave you desperate. You become easy to manage because you are not managing yourself. And this is where true psychological vulnerability lies, not in being emotional but in being unaware. You can have high intelligence, social success, even power, but if your shadow is unintegrated, you're still fragile. You'll be haunted by moods you can't control, attracted to toxic relationships that mirror your wounds, and stuck in loops that feel like fate. Jung wasn't warning us out of theory, he saw this play out in patient after patient. He once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." Most do. You might think avoiding your darkness keeps you pure, but it only makes you a stranger to yourself. And when you're unfamiliar with your own inner world, you're at the mercy of it. Integration is not about acting on every dark impulse. It's about recognizing them, naming them, understanding their root. Once you do that, you rob them of their power to control you unconsciously. You begin to observe your inner states with compassion instead of panic. The storm is still there, but now you can navigate it instead of being tossed around like debris. The shadow is not your enemy. It is your forgotten teacher. And unless you allow it to speak in your own voice, it will scream through the voices of others. The more you reject it, the more it shows up in your relationships, in your habits, in your quiet moments of self-loathing. But if you face it directly, something shifts. You move from victimhood to authorship. You begin to write your life from a place of wholeness, not fragmentation. And in that state, you become increasingly difficult to provoke, manipulate, or derail. Because the moment you meet your shadow without fear is the moment you begin to reclaim your mind. And in the next section you'll learn what that looks like in real life. Section 2, Shadow Projection, How You Become Controlled. You don't see the world as it is, you see it through the lens of your unconscious. That's the trap of projection. The shadow you refuse to own doesn't vanish, it slips into your perception of others. You meet someone and feel an unexplainable dislike, a disproportionate anger, or an obsessive attraction. But the emotion isn't truly about them, it's about you. It's about a part of yourself you have buried so deeply that seeing even a hint of it in another person shakes your inner world. Projection distorts clarity, replacing real interactions with a hall of mirrors. They move through life assuming their judgments are accurate. He's arrogant, they'll say, blind to their own suppressed pride. She's manipulative, unaware of their own habit of subtle control. These aren't reasoned observations, they are confessions spoken in reverse. What they find intolerable in others is often the exact thing they've repressed within. This is why projection feels so emotionally charged. It's not just an opinion, it's a war within the psyche, externalized. And when you don't recognize that, you live in constant psychological confusion, assigning blame outward while the fire burns inward. The cost of projection is subtle but profound. When you unconsciously place your shadow onto others, you become emotionally hijacked. Suddenly, you're no longer responding to what's in front of you, you're reacting to an internal ghost. A parent criticizes you and you're overwhelmed with rage, not because of the comment but because they echoed your own self-judgment. A colleague gets attention and you feel hatred, not for them but for the buried part of you that craves recognition but was taught to be modest. When your rational mind collapses under emotional weight, your actions cease to be your own. You become easy to manipulate this way. All someone has to do is reflect back your disowned traits, aggression, neediness, ambition, and you're thrown into chaos. They don't need power over you, your own lack of integration is enough. You are pulled into unnecessary arguments, seduced by toxic partners, derailed by envy, all because you are unknowingly at war with yourself. This is the secret behind many modern manipulations, from social media outrage to tribal politics. When your shadow is unclaimed, you're led by it. You're triggered by ideas, people, movements, not because they are dangerous but because they touch a nerve. But psychologically untouchable people operate differently. They've met their darkness and no longer fear it. So when someone insults them, they check in instead of lashing out. When someone succeeds, they don't collapse into bitterness, they recognize the difference between admiration and envy. Their emotions don't hijack their judgment because they've taken the time to understand where their emotions come from. This awareness doesn't make them emotionless, it makes them sovereign. They can still feel anger, sadness, or desire, but now they choose how to respond, rather than being pulled by unconscious tides. In relationships, this changes everything. Imagine arguments that don't spiral because projection isn't driving the fight. Imagine being able to hear criticism without defense, or love someone without making them your emotional caretaker. When projection ends, clarity begins. You stop expecting others to carry your shame, your fear, your unmet desires. Society too would transform. Without projection, tribalism weakens. You no longer need an enemy to justify your inner turmoil. Political and ideological division would lose their addictive grip. Most polarization thrives on shadow projection, each side demonizing the other as a reflection of their own denied qualities. There is a quiet power in seeing people as they are, rather than as distorted mirrors of yourself. And that power begins with owning what you've tried to bury. You stop reacting to ghosts and begin living in reality. The next stage of this process is the confrontation, not just with what you project but with the discomfort of reintegrating it. In the following section, we'll explore what it truly means to embrace your inner darkness and transmute it into strength. Section 3. The Path to Psychological Sovereignty, Integrating the Shadow. You begin to reclaim your inner authority not by pretending to be whole, but by finally seeing what you've always disowned. The process starts in discomfort, in the sharp sting of a reaction, in the judgment you throw toward someone else, or in a dream that disturbs more than it reveals. Your emotional overreactions are not random, they're flare signals from the unconscious. What you despise in others is often something unresolved in yourself. The more you insist that it's them, the deeper your psyche hides the truth. But once you start asking, why did that get under my skin? You begin unmasking the shadow. It's not easy to admit that the rage you feel toward the arrogant coworker, or the contempt for someone's neediness, might reflect pieces of your own psyche. But this is the doorway. Recognition cracks open the shell of denial. They often mistake self-awareness for self-shaming, but the shadow isn't something to purge or punish. It's not a villain living inside you, it's a wounded child in exile, cast away when you were too young to know what you were rejecting. That part of you, disowned and desperate, lives in your dreams, in your triggers, in your self-sabotage. Acceptance doesn't mean indulgence. It means facing the uncomfortable without fleeing. When you say, yes, I am capable of anger, envy, cruelty, you neutralize the shadow's unconscious grip. Its power dissolves under the light of conscious attention. The very act of acknowledging your darkness turns you inward, and in that turn, you meet the real you. What follows is the alchemy of integration. You take raw, rejected material, aggression, fear, selfishness, and you forge it into strength, clarity, and boundary. Aggression becomes assertiveness when you own it. Fear, once paralyzing, becomes caution, then strategy. Even selfishness, often demonized, transforms into self-respect when made conscious. The parts of you once hated become tools, not threats. You don't suppress them anymore, you give them a seat at the table and let them speak without taking control. You become a person who can contain their full spectrum, light and dark, without being ruled by either. This is what Jung meant when he said the goal is not to become good, but whole. They who reach this level no longer leak psychic energy through avoidance. Most people spend their lives trying to control external chaos while being blind to their internal fragmentation. Their relationships fall apart, not because they lack communication, but because neither person has owned their shadow. Without integration, one lover projects their unmet needs while the other retaliates from their hidden wounds. This loop plays out in friendships, families, politics, and nations. When enough individuals integrate their darkness, even society begins to shift, because fewer people are looking for monsters to kill outside themselves. You discover that psychological sovereignty isn't dominance over others, but non-reactivity within yourself. You stop giving people the script to manipulate you. Shame loses its bite. Guilt stops being a leash. The opinions of others become information, not commandments. You're no longer scrambling to prove, defend, or justify. And paradoxically, this calm detachment makes your presence more grounded, not less human. You're no longer hiding, so you're no longer afraid. The game of image management ends. This is not apathy, it's clarity. This is not arrogance, it's rootedness. They won't always understand the path you're walking. Integration is invisible. There's no medal for making peace with your shadow. In fact, it might cost you relationships, identities, and roles you once clung to. But what you gain is beyond transaction. You gain inner coherence. You become someone who can say, I know who I am, and I'm not at war with myself. That self-trust becomes a compass in the fog of modern confusion. When you're no longer trying to curate an identity, you're free to live one. This journey is not linear. Some days you will regress. Some shadows will resist the light or wear new masks. But each time you face what you once fled, you reclaim energy that was fragmented. Integration is a spiral, not a final destination but a perpetual deepening. With every layer uncovered, your unconscious becomes your ally, not your enemy. The shadow, once feared, becomes the silent reservoir of power, vision, and intuition. You're no longer fractured, you are inhabited. And when you walk through the world fully inhabited, aware of your projections, conscious of your wounds, and grounded in your reclaimed energy, no one can use your past against you. There is nothing hidden to exploit, no unspoken shame to weaponize. You've sat with the parts others spend their lives avoiding. That's what makes you psychologically untouchable. But this sovereignty is only the beginning. To truly live beyond illusion, you must now turn your attention outward, toward the deceptive forces shaping your perception every day. Let's explore the grand illusion that keeps most people trapped in a world they never questioned. When you integrate the shadow, you stop fearing your own unconscious. The darkness no longer has dominion over you. It becomes something to work with, not fight against. And once you make this peace, you begin to understand a deeper truth, that your shadow is not an anomaly or an unfortunate side effect of living. It is an essential part of your humanity. It's not the fractured part of you that needs to be excised. It is the very material from which you can create wholeness. Integration, therefore, isn't a process of denial or rejection. It's about embracing what's been hidden and finding its rightful place in the larger tapestry of your psyche. This reclamation isn't an instantaneous transformation, but a gradual reshaping of who you are. A shifting from a fractured, reactive state to a coherent, autonomous existence. They are often quick to overlook the power this integration grants. Most people search for wholeness through external means, finding validation in possessions, approval, or even in relationships that can never truly satisfy the need for internal harmony. But real sovereignty arises from the inner work, not from external accomplishments or the admiration of others. This is what Jung understood. The task isn't to build a facade of perfection, but to live authentically with every part of yourself. It is when you stop denying the brokenness within that you begin to experience true integration. By acknowledging that your flaws are not indications of moral failing, but merely forgotten parts of yourself, you begin to transcend the constant pursuit of idealization. The shadow, once integrated, is no longer something that weakens you. It becomes a wellspring of hidden strength. You start to realize that the deepest parts of your psyche, those you feared the most, are actually the very keys to your authenticity and power. In the beginning, as you confront your shadows, you might encounter resistance both internally and externally. There will be moments of doubt, times when it feels easier to revert to old patterns of denial. This is the nature of the unconscious. It doesn't easily give up control. Your mind might beg you to remain in familiar territories of denial and projection, tempting you back into the illusions of safety that come with ignoring your deeper truths. But this is precisely where the work lies. The moments of resistance are the very tests that prove your commitment to integrating the shadow. To truly master yourself, you must cultivate resilience in the face of discomfort. The strength to continue integrating, to keep owning what is yours, comes from the awareness that avoiding your shadow only empowers it to control you. Each time you turn back toward the darkness and refuse to flee, you reclaim another piece of your fragmented soul, another moment of strength. They often fall prey to the belief that integration means perfection, or that by accepting the shadow, you somehow accept weakness or failure. This couldn't be further from the truth. Integration isn't about becoming better, but about becoming more whole. You begin to accept that flaws are not flaws at all, but simply parts of the human condition. When you accept your aggression not as something to suppress, but as something to understand, you see that it carries energy that, when channeled properly, can serve your assertiveness, your courage, your will to defend what matters. Similarly, when you acknowledge your fear, it stops being something that paralyzes you and instead becomes a guide, pointing you toward the areas of your life that need attention. Every repressed emotion, Every disowned trait holds energy that, when integrated, allows you to live fully. Your shadow, once fragmented and feared, becomes a full-bodied force, alive with creativity, power, and wisdom. In this process, you become a model for others. You show them what it means to truly own who you are, not by flaunting perfection, but by embracing your imperfections as integral to your wholeness. This is not arrogance or bravado, but a grounded strength born from humility. When you no longer need to hide or perform, you free yourself from the chains of external validation. This is the essence of psychological sovereignty. You stop looking for permission to exist as you are and instead start creating from a place of deep internal alignment. You stop wearing masks to please others and instead, you offer them the freedom of being themselves. Your presence, now untethered from falsehood, becomes a beacon of authenticity that others can trust. In a world filled with pretense and projection, your grounded, integrated self becomes an oasis of calm amidst the chaos. They also tend to underestimate the subtle shifts that occur once integration takes hold. The effects of shadow work are not always immediately visible, but they accumulate over time. You notice the small changes first. The way you respond to conflicts, no longer blindly reactive but thoughtful, measured. The way you stop taking things personally, realizing that most of what others say or do is just a reflection of their own unintegrated shadows. You stop being caught in the web of others' projections and start seeing people for who they truly are, flawed, complex, and struggling just like you. You realize that no one can trigger you without your consent. By integrating your own shadows, you become impervious to manipulation and emotional hijacking. You no longer fall prey to the tactics of emotional vampires, for there is nothing left for them to feed on within you. Your energy remains intact, no longer siphoned off by unconscious reactions or unprocessed pain. The beauty of shadow integration lies not just in individual healing, but in its ripple effect. As you make peace with your own darkness, you stop contributing to the collective suffering caused by repressed human emotions. The more individuals work on their shadows, the less chaos and violence there is in the world. This is the power of consciousness. When enough people take responsibility for their own projections, the external world begins to reflect that shift. It's not about changing the world through force or coercion, but through the quiet work of integration and awareness. As you heal, you contribute to the healing of others, and together, you create a different kind of world. One where projection, manipulation, and tribalism lose their grip. The act of integrating your shadow becomes an act of social responsibility, because it creates a ripple effect that resonates through every relationship, every interaction, and every community. Now that you have the tools to integrate your own darkness, it's time to explore how this internal sovereignty can help you navigate the external challenges that are often the greatest sources of psychological suffering. Let's look closely at the forces of modern society and how they influence our collective psyche. For many, in the end, the journey towards psychological sovereignty is not one of achieving an idealized state of perfect selfhood, but rather a continual process of self-awareness and integration. This path is not about transcending your flaws but about embracing them. The wisdom of Carl Jung's work invites you to understand that your humanity is inextricably tied to both your light and your darkness. The shadow is not something to be eradicated, it is something to be integrated. It's only by acknowledging these unconscious aspects of yourself, by accepting them, understanding them, and ultimately owning them, that you can step into the full spectrum of your psychological power. When you do so, you become untouchable, not in the sense of invincibility, but in your ability to navigate the storms of life without being thrown off course by emotional triggers or external manipulation. This is the strength that comes from understanding who you truly are, including all the parts you've been taught to hide. The key to this transformation lies in what Jung calls the process of individuation, where the journey is not about self-improvement but about self-acceptance. It's a continuous unfolding of the self, not as a fixed identity, but as a dynamic, ever-evolving entity that incorporates every facet of your being. The mistake most people make is thinking that their shadows, their flaws, and their insecurities are a mark of failure, when in fact they are the very ground from which the true self emerges. You cannot grow if you keep denying the soil from which your roots sprout. Instead of searching for external sources of validation or approval, the work of individuation pushes you to turn inward and face the very aspects of yourself that you've been avoiding. It's through this confrontation that you find your true freedom. Freedom not from your flaws but from the shame of them. Once you begin integrating your shadow, the change is subtle, yet profound. You may not notice an immediate shift, but over time, you will feel a deepening sense of peace. You stop reacting to the world with the same intensity. The conflicts and dramas that once consumed you become less potent because you no longer give them the power to define your emotional state. You stop projecting your internal struggles onto others, and instead, you begin to see people as they truly are, complex, flawed, and whole in their own right. This detachment from reactive emotional patterns allows you to become an observer of your life rather than a mere participant. It grants you the freedom to choose how you respond to external events, rather than being controlled by your past conditioning. Your emotional energy becomes more focused, more deliberate, and more in alignment with your deeper truths. But the real test comes when the external world begins to challenge this newfound sense of inner sovereignty. Life will inevitably present you with opportunities to test the boundaries of your psychological resilience. People will trigger you, situations will test your emotional stability, and the darkness of the world will make itself known. This is where the integration of the shadow becomes your greatest ally. It's in these moments of external pressure that the work of self-awareness truly shines. When you know yourself, when you understand the parts of you that have been rejected, ignored, or suppressed, you can navigate these challenges without being consumed by them. The projection no longer controls you, and therefore the power of others to manipulate you fades. You are free to act with intent, not reaction. In the modern world, where distractions abound and societal pressures often demand conformity, the task of psychological sovereignty is more relevant than ever. People are pulled in 1,000 directions, manipulated by media, social expectations, and the weight of cultural narratives. The temptation to suppress parts of ourselves, to deny the complexity of our being in favor of a simpler, more acceptable version, has never been greater. However, the price of this suppression is a fragmented psyche, one that is vulnerable to the manipulations of others. To truly break free from the chains of societal conditioning, you must first reclaim the pieces of yourself that have been lost in the shadows. You must integrate those pieces into your conscious self, recognizing them not as defects but as essential parts of who you are. The ultimate promise of shadow integration is a life lived with authenticity and agency. You no longer need to seek external validation because you've already validated yourself. You no longer need to prove your worth to others, because you've already accepted your own intrinsic value. The external world may try to shape you, manipulate you, and make you question your worth, but once you are integrated, once you have made the darkness conscious, nothing can destabilize you. You become invulnerable not because you are impervious to harm, but because you no longer depend on external forces to define your sense of self. In embracing your own shadow, you unlock the greatest power you can have. The power to be yourself unapologetically, fully, and without compromise. As you step forward into this journey, remember that the path of shadow integration is not a final destination, but a continuous process. The work is never complete, but that is the beauty of it. Every step toward understanding yourself more deeply brings with it new layers of potential, new opportunities for growth. By embracing your shadow, you are not only becoming more whole, but also more capable of navigating the complexities of the world with a sense of clarity, control, and resilience. This is the true power of psychological sovereignty, the ability to stand firm in your own truth, regardless of the forces that may try to sway you. The world will continue to change, but your inner strength, rooted in the fullness of your being, will remain unwavering.